1968's Night of the Living Dead is not only an influential horror film, but is more specifically extremely influential on the subgenre of zombie outbreaks. That being said, the film's director George Romero has gone on record to say that it wasn't a term that they were thinking of when they were making the film, both because it wasn't the catch-all term it is today, and secondly because he had more specific terminology for the film's dead. They are called ghouls and, more significantly, flesh eaters in the movie. And it takes a significant portion of the runtime before they're even acknowledged as the dead at all. Now, zombies have held a firm place in horror pop culture for decades, and I would argue that one of the most popular interpretations of zombies as a symbol is for, kind of mindless consumerism, an anti-capitalist message. But I think it's also very easy for depictions of zombies to bump up against the kind of purported enemy of the Red Scare, them being a kind of sweeping contagion that can take over your loved ones and even recontextualize the dead. They are raving monsters intent on taking everything from you, not excluding your own life or even the flesh of your body. All that being said, I don't think either example fits the bill for the intent of the inclusion of the living dead in this film. Instead, they're a kind of stand-in for this metaphorical American cannibalism where the events being criticized are the choice to go to Vietnam, the choice of how we treated those who returned from the Vietnam War, and notably the treatment of Black Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. Primary protagonist Ben, a black man, is the obvious hero of the film, but even though he's the sole survivor at the end, he ends up being gunned down by the law enforcement posse that has arrived ostensibly to deal with the zombie threat. In the context of the Vietnam War, the dead could represent those returning from the horrors of war. They have all the trappings of being alive, eating, walking, maybe even making sounds, but at the same time their personalities have been killed off. They're no longer the loved ones that left for war. They are now the living dead who've returned. This is made all the more apparent by the rumored catalyst of this transformation of the dead, with representatives of NASA being asked pointedly by journalists in broadcasts throughout the film whether or not a probe that was sent on a round trip to Venus had anything to do with this. The rumors more specifically saying that it came back with some Venetian radiation that transformed or mutated humanity. In other words, the hubris of America going places it shouldn't go and coming back with things that change us irrevocably. And all the other characters we meet besides Ben just losing all sense and blundering to their own ends while being symbols of American life. We have a young brother and sister where the sister is a symbol of innocence that has fallen into grief in a near catatonic state at the loss of her brother and at the confrontation of this violence shattering her worldview. We have the Coopers, who are a stand-in for the American nuclear family, a father, a mother, and a daughter. The patriarch Mr. Cooper making pointless proclamations, Mrs. Cooper undermining him at every turn, and culminating with the loss of the daughter who ends up joining the living dead at the end of the film and even puts an end to her mother. And a young couple who seem more willing to follow Ben's lead, but ultimately end up panicking and driving off in the truck that turns out to be their own end. Ben, in contrast, is smart, he's cool-headed, he is good in a crisis, making the smartest choices from the options available. And you get the impression that he is good under pressure, good in a crisis, because he's experienced crises before. And he's under no delusion that anyone, government included, is really coming to help them, instead wishing to take his fate into his own hands. He contrasts both with the dead, who are described by some of the broadcasters as looking like people but behaving like animals, and he contrasts with the other survivors who don't seem to be able to stop themselves from panicking and making dumb decisions that end up costing them their lives. He survives the living dead only to be gunned down by agents of America. And we poignantly get these very disturbing images after Ben loses his life of the police officers treating the living dead that they had put down like sacks of meat, and including Ben in that, having meat hooks implied to be how they moved his body. There's a reason this film is notable not only for horror, but for film in general. I love a lot of horror movies, and there are plenty that I would recommend, but there's very few that I think would be a must-watch, not just for horror fans, but for people who like movies in general, and this is one of them. But I still got more movies to get through, so if you want to join me in 31 Days of Horror and watch some of the movies I'm watching this October, the list of films I'm watching is in my pinned videos. Until then, don't forget, they're coming to get you, Barbara.